So one of the reasons why I want to bring America greatness, and I want them to understand that we are fundamentally flawed in this country because we never really understood what's the messaging we ought to be sending to everyone about living here. And how can we, as a country, become so fine-tuned in our ability to interact with folks that it's natural, not complicated, and how its impact, and why we have to be very intentional if we're going to be effective at doing just that, because we are all flawed by where we grow up. All of us are. And we need to understand what that means for us if we're really going to be great. Because I'm telling you, greatness is rooted in our ability to relate to each other. We will never be great until we understand how powerful that can be in so many ways. And the direct connection between that and being culturally competent. Because you believe you me, there is an energy in the workplace when people get along. There's an energy on a sports team when people know how to be part of a team. There is an energy in all of our sectors if we understand that anywhere people gather, you can't divorce that from the situation. It's real, very real. And so we need to make sure that we are developing that skill set in all of us. And it's never ending. It's always going to be a work in progress. So one of the things I'm trying to get folks to realize is that our skill set in being culturally competent, hear me, should never, ever, ever do harm. Cultural competency, by virtue of what it means, positive interaction with people that are different, should never do harm. That's always been my litmus test. In the name of being great, it should never do harm. So what I'm suggesting to you is to really understand what it means to relate to people different than you in a positive way. It should always be positive and never do harm. If something does harm, it doesn't take cultural competency. I worry that in our interaction with folks that are different, because we don't understand it, our words do harm. And that is a deficit to greatness. It's so important that we understand that if we're going to be great, we have to focus on the conditions for greatness. And believe you me, this is something this whole world needs. This is something our country needs. This is something our families need. This is something our communities need. This is something the workplace needs as well. I don't have to tell you, there's not a workplace I've been in that doesn't have cliques. People tend to gravitate to people that they like to be around. If there's anything that I say, every single employer in this country ought to be measuring the cultural competency skill set of their employees. Why? Because it has something to do with greatness, and the better skilled they are at it, the better energy that's going to be in that workplace, and the better people are going to be performing. And when people walk in the door, I always refer to walking in the door, even when kids, I don't care where you are. When they come in here, everyone's taught respect, honor, excellence. Together, we can achieve. Just do no harm and strive to show the best of you and me. That's a pledge, by the way. It's so important to understand every place you go. Wouldn't it be nice to walk into a place where just because you walked in the door, you're respected, you're honored, doesn't matter what your difference is. What really matters is what's in here. Just your goodwill, that's it. That's the only measuring stick. But it's such an important part of bringing America greatness. So, I focus on training people on this notion of equity leadership. This is the flaw in DE&I. Our inability to explain why equal opportunity for everyone is important for everyone. And I'm telling you, it got lost in the framework for DE&I. What in the world is that? What it should have been is that anybody who runs an organization where people gather and people are going to be different, you need to make sure that they all deserve an equal opportunity to come into that workplace and feel welcome, an equal opportunity to come into that workplace and be treated fairly, an equal opportunity to be included, and as I say to my students in class all the time, an equal opportunity to excel. That's what equity is. So this debate on DE&I, I don't even get involved with because it's not set up right. Equity is the thing that all of us need to know and understand if we're going to lead people. It's our job. Everyone deserves it. So when we talk about kids with disability, yes, they deserve an equal opportunity too. When you talk about folks that are handicapped, yes, they deserve an equal opportunity too. When you talk about kids who are different, who go to school and be bullied just because they don't look like or just because somebody doesn't like them, those kids deserve an equal opportunity too, and you can fill in the blank. And it's leadership's job to make sure that happens. Equity is something we all deserve. If you are a different religion, you still deserve an equal opportunity too. Equity is leadership's job. You can't write it off. In America or any place in this world, it's the job of people in charge to assure that when folks come in here, they understand how important it is to make sure that everyone feels the energy around being somewhere where people know how to live, work, play, and learn together. That's equity. And believe me, that's the flaw in the way D&I was put together. So I always talk about equity as being something we all need. I also connect equity to greatness, to excellence, because it is. It is. Now, you heard my story about growing up in Beaver County and traveling to Texas. Well, let me tell you what that really says. My first book I wrote was called Practice Makes Perfect Not. Excellence is a Habit. And excellence has a culture. By culture, I mean there's a way you act when you want to be the best version of yourself. There's things you subscribe to. Excellence has a culture. And what excellence does as a culture is drive how people act. I grew up Sheffield. Whoa. I grew up Sheffield. Let me tell you what my siblings learned growing up with Bessie and Reverend Eugene Sheffield. There was a culture to being a Sheffield. Do you hear me? There were things, there were ways we acted because we were Sheffields. If one of our Sheffield family members went to school, let me tell you what happened in school. My parents insisted that when you go to school, you will go to school and learn. And if a teacher had a Sheffield in their class, oh my gosh, they loved it. You know why? Because they had a hotline to my parents. And my parents were always going to be on their side. They could do nothing wrong. And so we couldn't come home and complain about why we got this grade in class. Even at the time, I can still remember it. My elementary reader at New Brighton, Third Wood Elementary School, my elementary reader, watch this, Dick, Jane, Sally, Spot the Dog, The White Picket Fence. That was my reader. And it didn't matter if it made any sense to me as a little black child growing up in New Brighton. It didn't matter. To my parents, you will read that book and you will learn that book and you will value the importance of education. Teachers love having a Sheffield in their class. That was the culture at home. My dad taught us work before play. I call it earn the right to chill. Oh yeah. You want to talk about practice in your house? You got kids? Good practice for those kids? Earn the right to chill. It's part of the culture. Culture drives how people act. At the end of this session, y'all gonna have a test on culture and how it makes us act in certain ways just because of what we practice. It's a powerful, powerful force and it impacts all of us. And because practice, as I often say, people like to say practice make, perfect, right? Half true. What doing things over and over and over again makes permanent. Do you hear me? Kids doing things over and over again will make it permanent. And somehow my parents figured this out. That's why we practice earning the right to chill. Because in our house, work before play. All the guys and family, we all played basketball. My brother Calvin, he went to University of Pittsburgh on a full basketball academic scholarship. And that's what some of us guys wanted to do. But my dad had his own eligibility rules. You want to play sports? You will bring home A's and B's. Period. Period. That was the culture. That was, because to him, chilling, sports was chilling. You will earn the right to do it. All the time. I would say, operators of workplace, all the time. You got to watch what you're letting your employees practice. Because they go there every day. 8 hours a week, 5 days a week. And what they do during that time is a compelling practice. And when they do it over and over and over and over again, they can't help it. It becomes permanent. You can take that to the bank. And what I learned about this notion of practice makes permanent when it comes to cultural competency is the exact practice that grows up in our experience or doesn't. See, the practice of commission, sometimes we take athletes and we teach them certain things to practice to get good at their sport. That's commission. That's what they do. But the practice of omission, watch out now. I always, you probably can tell, every once in a while I speak in church, every once in a while, right? And I tell folks, you'll probably say ouch sometimes before you'll say amen. Well, this is an ouch moment. The practice of omission is still a practice. Do you hear me? What we don't do over and over and over again ends up in creating a practice of omission that can harm us later because we didn't get to do it. Why? The reason why I was unprepared for arriving in San Antonio, Texas, the reason why is because of the practice of omission, directly related to my experience that I didn't have, and I didn't even know it. And this is what I say about people all the time. People want to call people, by all these phobia names. No, so often it's the practice of omission that hasn't been in their experience. And the result is cultural incompetence. Why? Because practice makes permanent. I'm trying to expand your thinking about why in America we struggle with interacting with folks that are different and even understanding them, regardless of their difference. And in reality, it has so much to do with many times they're out of our experience. We haven't become close to them. We don't know who they are. And it's out of our experience. And so as a result, we are deficient in our ability to make America great. It takes a broad skill set, an intentional skill set. And as a matter of fact, I am so engaged in schools right now because our children need to learn this. Our children need to recognize how important it is to live, work, play, and learn together. And in spite of the dangers of the practice of omission, we still got to help them get it. Beaver County. This is an ouch moment. Beaver County, 14 school districts. Hello. Beaver County, in an area probably where there should be 3. Beaver County, many of the experiences of our kids are absent any kind of diversity. Unintentionally. And so we've got some great school districts in Beaver County. But greatness is often measured, hear me now, ask the Pittsburgh Business Times, this is often measured by the kids' grades and their performance. Nah, that's called the best. Best and greatness are 2 different things. To be great, it has a huge moral fiber connection. Huge. One in which also instills the value of our fellow human beings. One that also instills the importance of us caring about each other. That, connected with achievement, is greatness. So let's distinguish, please, between the best and the greatest. So the difference between goat and boat. Do you hear me? There is a difference. So we get confused. So what I'm trying to get you to see is the practice of omission is still a practice. And if we want our kids to be great, we got to be very intentional, because what they learn in Beaver County is very little about how to interact with people other than ones that look like, act like, and live like they do. That's dangerous in a country as diverse as ours is. And remember, it's not necessarily anyone's fault that this is the experience these kids are facing, but we have to be very intentional about preparing them for greatness. You hear me? For greatness. Not just being your best, but being great. And that's the methodology, that's the framework that I come from. So with that in mind, isolation in so many ways fosters biases, fosters prejudice, fosters phobias, isolation. And in many ways, we are living with that isolation every single day. And I worry, I worry about Beaver County. I really do. I worry about Beaver County because so much of our experiences are in isolation. We got so many townships and communities. Think of them. We do. We live in isolation, and you can't help but lack experience with those very important groups. We live that way. If we're going to have this high-performing energy, we've got to understand that how we connect across our communities, important. Our experiences together, important. Isolation oftentimes fosters prejudice. And so we have to begin to recognize that if our institutions, our schools, the workplace, our communities, our churches and synagogues lack diversity, experiences, the consequence is what you see is what you get. We have to be more intentional about fixing that if we want to be great. And so my messaging is quite clear. let's all begin to think through how important it is for us to shape our communities, our workplaces, our place of worship, to shape them in a way that allows us to experience what greatness truly is. And it's beyond just achievement. High performance has a practice, and so does low performance. Understanding the conditions for high performance. What are the conditions? You can substitute excellence for that word high performance. What are the conditions that allow us to be the best versions of ourselves? I'm convinced that we will never be the best version of ourselves until we understand how cultural competency connects to those conditions. It does. And if we want to be the best version of ourselves, we have to make sure we know how to live, work, play, and learn together, and the skill set necessary to do that. So one of the things I have learned about addressing issues, this is what helped me understand the flaw in DE&I. And that was Sandra Queen's Village Story. And this was in a book by Sandra Queen called Wellness for Children. And it's a story about a village located downstream on a very large river. And all the economy of this village is built around pulling people out of this river as they float by. And these people that they pull out of this river, some of them are injured and disabled, and some of them are dead. And so all of the economy on this village was built around this village going to this river, pulling people out, treating the dead, treating the living, and the disabled, burying the dead. This is what they did. And they got very good at it, developing all kinds of sophisticated procedures to treat the ill and injured, and in burying the dead. Then one day, a very wise person came up with a radical idea. I like to call this my wise woman, because women think differently than men, and rightfully so. I like to call this my wise woman. One day, this woman came up with a very radical idea. She said, why don't we go upriver and find out why people are falling in the first place? Hello. In America, and in many parts of this world, we spend too much time downriver trying to fix things that we never completely fix. Why? Because we're focused downriver and don't always have an understanding of, whoa, what is the real problem here? What is the real problem here? And why can't we go upriver and find out why people are falling in the first place? So I ask you, okay, this is your time to talk to me. I ask you, if we just think of this issue of cultural incompetence and why in America we continue to grapple with this thing, even to the point where we have folks saying, okay, get rid of this, get rid of it. In the name of what? Because the reality is, we will always have to treat people according to what they need. We always have to be equitable. And so what is it that we could do if we were to take this phobia we have, if we were to take this cultural incompetence we have, and instead of trying to treat it downriver, what's upriver in this whole area of living, working, playing, learn together that we could do better to address the shortcoming of cultural incompetence, to address the phobias that we often face? What could we do better? I ask that as a question to anybody that would like to respond. My background is education, so I'm a teacher first. So I would say, I see you.
I see you.
And it's so important to understand that, yes, Leslie, that's absolutely right. We have to do things that allow our schools, especially, to have experiences, engagement. I love the word engagement because it speaks to intimacy. You can't just do this once in a while, right? Engagement really means often. If we were doing things that allowed us, not just in schools, I'm also the executive director, president, whatever you want to call it, of the Inclusion, Diversity, and Awareness Council. And we have several subcommittees on this council. One of them is the faith-based community. So this coming fall, we're going to be working on getting faith-based communities. Now, keep in mind that one of the most segregated hours in our week is Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, when most churches are in place, and oftentimes, just by the very nature of the experience, it's absent diversities. So what we're doing this coming year is we're going to solicit faith-based communities who would like to be involved in an Adopt Diversity initiative, in which we help them connect to another faith-based organization that has a little more diversity, and that they can begin to interact in a way that grows them in this area. Engagement with schools. I happen to sit, by the way, really this has been an eye-waking experience. The WPIAL, you heard of the WPIAL, right? Many of you? Okay, good. The WPIAL, under the leadership of a woman 5 years ago, Amy Schunerman, she's amazing. She's not the executive right now, she went to another job. But under her leadership, she started an equity advisory council for the WPIAL for one basic reason. We were having serious issues when our schools were competing on the sports fields, especially in football and basketball, with culturally insensitive communication going on during the game between the players. And it was ugly. And so when those things happen, it's reported to WPIAL, we have this big hearing trying to address it. And so as part of that, I became involved with a number of other folks on this council. And here's one of the things we discovered in our own research into these incidents that occur. Most of the incidents occurred when rural schools were competing with less rural schools. And in many cases, the rural schools were really absent diversity. So their kids, athletes, had no experiences with diversity on their teams. And as a result, remember what I said about the practice of omission? It's powerful. And oftentimes, in the rah-rah nature of sports and toughness and win and all that stuff, sportsmanship gets lost. The greatness of sports is not in who wins or loses. It's the way the game is played. And if you don't believe me, watch the end of the NFL games whenever football teams compete. The greatest part of that game, as far as I'm concerned, is watch that quarterback go seek out the quarterback of the other team. Watch that lineman go seek out the lineman of the other team. And this collegiality that exists is the greatness of sports. We can never lose that. And there are those of us on this committee committed to it. Why? Because out of no fault of many of these athletes that play it, it's just a product of where they've grown up. And folks have not been intentional about making sure that these kids recognize for us to be great, we have to know how to live, work, play, and learn together. Whether we're rural, urban, suburban, doesn't matter. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. We have to learn it. And we have to become intentional and engaged about it. Leslie, you're absolutely right. We've got to do more of that. So one of the things that we did, we said to every school, you will now have a student athlete advisory council in every single school in the WPIAL. And that those student athletes from those councils, we will bring together often to ensure that they're learning how to grow together with each other. And we'll make this part of how the WPIAL operates. If you've ever been to a WPIAL sports contest in the last 2 years, playoff, you will hear a pledge before the game starts. It's the do no harm pledge that we put together for athletes to understand why it's important for them to interact with a positive way. We've got to become that intentional, because that's the reality of us if we want to be great. If we want to be average, but high performance is about greatness, high performance is about understanding the conditions for greatness, high performance is about getting upriver and find out what it takes to create greatness in our society. So, I'm going to shift your paradigm about cultural competency, excellence, high performance. And I'm going to do that by asking you to do something for me with the person that's closest to you. I'm going to ask you to partner up who controlled the pencil. How did you decide who was going to go? I mean, if you hadn't, you would have all been sitting there with nothing. How did you decide who controlled the pencil? Yes?
I gave up control.
Say it loud.
I gave up control.
You gave up control so the other person could take control. Okay? Anybody else do that?
I did.
You gave up control so they could take control. Okay?
I did, and I wasn't happy about it. I mean, as evidenced by our first line, it is like this way. We're both like fighting for it. Then I'm like, forget it.
She said, Rich, are you going to take control? I said, Leslie, I'm the quarterback.
Well, really long before we started, I was like, oh, this will be fun. He goes, and I said, okay.
Sorry.
Don't minimize that conversation. We're going to talk about that too. Yes?
So I put my hand down lower, but then made a conscious effort to like not steer the pen the whole time.
So that would be a signal for her to pick up, to continue.
Even though my hand could have taken control, I tried to not be forced.
Aha. Some people also say they start and then they stop to send the cue that it's your turn. So, and you know what's interesting? I did this, you probably all know, I spent most of my career at Penn State, and I was doing this training for all these department heads. And you want to talk about some very linear acting folks. It's these deans of the colleges at Penn State, right? So I'm doing this activity with them. And believe you me, it was interesting to see what happened in them trying to draw this dream house. Because first of all, they don't share. They want control. And the other thing is that if that's when I decided I was going to tell them that it needed these three things. Because if you hadn't known that it needed a chimney, a two-car garage, and a tree in the front yard, imagine how all over the place this would be. The other thing that I have learned from this is that the difference between equality and equity. And there's a difference. I didn't tell you how to do this and how to decide who was going to have the opportunity to participate. You had to decide that based on whatever your perception was about getting this done. And what I've noticed over the years in doing this is that it's rarely equal. Everybody gets a 50% chance to do that. I mean, everybody gets a 50% chance, but in the actual doing it, there are other measures coming into place. One, how artistic the person was that you partnered with. There's an urgency in doing this to discover that. And once you discover that, the other person's along for the ride and doesn't mind at all. Doesn't mind at all, because each of you has an equal opportunity to participate. And just because you are participating, it's so important to understand how to be connected to the other person in a way that allows you to drill into, okay, how do they want to do this? How do they want to participate? And what's making them feel comfortable? The whole reason for understanding the difference between equity and equality is to understand comfort. Because we are not all the same. I know if I was doing this, I would be the first one to say, let me figure out who can draw the best. Because I can't. It's like trying to get me to sing. I can't sing. I'm in this unity choir. I got to tell you about this unity choir. I'm in this unity choir because I helped establish it, and the folks that were involved with it they want me to participate. I said, y'all ain't heard me sing. So I'd rather leave that to them. But yeah, they got me up there. I'm trying, I'm learning. But I'm telling you, equity and equality, similar but different. Equity is that piece of equality that gives folks comfort. Because treating everyone the same is not the same as giving everyone the same opportunity. And have we learned that from schools. In my business as a teacher, it's one of the first things I learned from my students is that those buggers are different. Oh yeah. Their learning style is different, depending many times on whether they come from a middle-class family or a family of poverty or a family that's wealthy. Their learning styles are different. And so you have to learn different strokes for different folks. That's equity. And it's the foundation for creating that human connection that leads to greatness. That human connection is vital to all of us becoming the best version of ourselves and moving from that realm of just being the best to being the greatest. So it's so important that you first recognize the difference between equality and equity. So without the instructions that I gave you, as a matter of fact, anybody got done with this in 30 seconds or less, could have been very equitable if the other person was comfortable with the experience. Nothing wrong with that. What I do know from this experience, and I'm going to put these out on display on the table so you all can see all of them, but let me give you some cues. Look for the sharp lines. Look for the sharp lines. The sharper the lines usually mean somebody let go, so that others could participate, because when you're trying to pull and they're trying to pull, that line gets pretty jagged. Okay, so that's one thing I think you will see when you look at these, is look for the sharp lines. Now the smooth line doesn't mean that two people are doing it together. It typically means that one person is doing it and the other one is following. And that's when you get the sharper lines. And that's when you get those conditions, of equity. That it's okay for somebody to get a little bit more than me, because I'm okay with it. Why? Because we're different. And that's okay. The only thing that matters is what's in here. So I'm trying to get you to see that equity has a practice, truly does. And it's deeply rooted in understanding the comfort zone that we have to have. Just because somebody gets attention in a way that allows them to excel. It's okay, as long as people understand that that's part of that comfort zone. This dream house activity was designed to give you a sense of things don't have to be equal to be good. When people are on the same team, they establish their own goodness if they really recognize the importance of equity. Martin Luther King said, "We may have all come to America aboard different ships, but we're in the same boat now." You want to talk about an upriver issue for America. This wonderful country of immigrants, this wonderful country of diversity. What America never truly did was help folks understand the skill set to operate in the same boat. America's solution was to assimilate everybody, make everybody the same. They're going to come here, they're going to give up their wonderful heritage, speak English, and know that that's the most important thing to coming to America. And that their heritage, their ethnic traditions that they bring, not important. Now, it wasn't necessarily intentional to create a country that lacked an understanding of each other. Their intention was to get all these folks to be able to work together in the same place, to be able to speak English, to be able to increase our economic growth. That was the intent. But the reality was, it created a practice that became so permanent, it didn't take very many generations for people not to even know what their heritage was. And it's real. I'm going to show you that example in a minute. So, in helping folks understand what Greatness Foundation really rests, it rests in this equity trilogy. And that trilogy is made up of three things. That if we treat equity, as the umbrella, it's important to understand that this umbrella has three components: diversity, inclusion, and cultural competency. And oftentimes, this is where that flaw harmed us. Because America never drilled down to what's important for you and me to possess skill-wise in order for us to operate in the same boat, in order for us to have that high energy as a country, as a workplace, as a family. We fail to get folks to see the importance of cultural competency. We could never get there by emphasizing alone diversity and inclusion. Diversity is about understanding that we are all different. Inclusion is about making sure people who are different participate, have equal opportunity to participate. Yeah, that's all sounds fine. But what's the skill to do that? What are things that people ought to have, to know, in order to face that inclusionary country that we live in, world that we live in? And believe you me, it takes a skill. So in my athletic experience, as I've always liked to compare things to sports from time to time. Here's what I've always say about this skill set. As a basketball player and as a coach, so I've coached many kids about how to play this game, right? And so, you got to be able to shoot, you got to be able to pass, you got to be able to dribble. I truly believe that to be excellent in basketball, if we omitted from the practice of these kids dribbling, how underperforming would our athletes be? Cultural competency is like dribbling. If we don't know how to interact with people in a positive way, what difference does it make if they're diverse or included, if we can't have that human experience that allows us to do it together? The reason why athletics is so successful is that these coaches know it all. Being culturally incompetent is like a basketball player that can't dribble. They're ineffective. We have to understand we are products of a country that established practices that impeded our ability to be culturally competent. And now we have to become very intentional, because if we don't, we aren't treading down that path of greatness. You can't erase diversity. You can't erase the principle of, you can't erase it. That's like being downriver, trying to pull people out of this river as they float by. Get upriver and understand, if we're going to be a great nation, we have to start teaching folks how to relate to other in a positive way. We will never be great by trying to erase diversity and inclusion. It's not going to happen. Get upriver and get folks involved in helping create those kinds of activities that will allow us to reach the greatness that America deserves. So yes, we may have all come to America aboard different ships, but we're in the same boat now. And we have to get this. Cultural competency is the ability to interact and relate to people different than you in a positive way. It's skills for this salad bowl we live in. And at most important, remember, the exercise of that skill should never do harm. Our ability to interact with folks that are different than we are should never do harm. If you ever want to experience cultural competency, that experience should never harm someone. Never. You know, because what's important about people is not what's on the outside. It's what's on the inside. So you need to develop this skill set to really see people for what's important and understand what's not important. The very essence of being culturally competent is knowing that difference. Because believe you me, if isolation breeds the phobias, oftentimes that lack of isolation breeds cultural incompetence. And people often use their lack of experience in a harmful way. Cultural incompetence is about doing no harm. And that's why I'm so connected to that messaging, to make sure that in the exercise of that skill, we don't do harm. Here's what I've learned from these sessions, from people just like you. And this is what led me to those 4 A's I'm going to tell you about. Ask yourself this question: what makes you go to work and perform that job to the best of your ability every single day? What are the things in the workplace that makes you want to go to work every day and perform to the best of your ability? Talk to me. Anybody. What are the things that you look forward to when you go to the workplace that makes you want to perform to the best of your ability?
My coworkers.
Say it loud.
My coworkers.
Ah, do you hear what she said? I see you. My coworkers. How about that? She didn't say if they meet all these qualifications. She said, my coworkers. Ah, how about that? Is that news to any of you? It's important, right? Now the statement I made was, what makes you go to work and perform to the best of your ability? And she's spot on. She says, my coworkers. There's more. Come on, tell me more. Yes?
Participants.
Say it loud.
Participants.
Your participants, your clients, the people you work with. Ah, you know why? Because there's something about that that's intrinsic in you. You see, we carry that to the workplace when we go. You know, it's what's in here, and it has something to do with, does that tickle me? You know, if your clients do something that's, oh my gosh, I see you, I feel you, that's tremendously rewarding to those who know that doing this job and getting that kind of feedback tickles something in me. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's so important to understand. Others. What makes you go to work and want to perform to the best of your ability? Yes. Either one.
Helping someone.
Helping someone. How, you know what's... The term GOAT, greatest of all time. And you've heard this used in a lot of sports figures, right? My measure of greatness isn't how good they were at that sport. Say it loud what you just said.
Helping someone?
Right. Reaching back and helping others is greatness. Now, you can be the best at that sport, but if you haven't done anything to reach back to others, to help to show how much you appreciate what you've accomplished, you're the best, but it doesn't make it great. You've got to be able to help. There's something about that mirrors greatness. And you had your hand up too. You were going to say something.
Making a positive impact.
Making a positive impact, absolutely. You know, here's the thing that I realize. And there's a method to this madness. Those of you that employ folks, hear me. Hear me. I'm convinced that we ought to be measuring the things that lead our employees to perform to the best of their ability. And we ought to be looking for that quality when we hire somebody. Do you hear me? Because that's greatness. And oftentimes, we need to delve into those very things we understand about what makes it difficult for folks to perform to the best of their ability. So I say we need to begin to add to our qualifications for work this notion of greatness. And this notion of how you interact with folks in the workplace, this notion of what tickles you, so that you don't think I would want to know that about somebody who's coming to work for me? You know, because if they don't get tickled by the experience of helping others, what are they doing working in social service? You hear me? If you're after greatness, you need to understand what that looks like and why it's so important, and why in America we have many, many, many folks who haven't had experiences that allow them to get there. Believe me, we got to get smarter about this human capacity in maximizing people in which connects to the job people do every day. So yes, cultural competency, greatness, is about connecting to that human experience that allows us to reach our potential and do no harm. So, what I've learned from this is that assimilation and pluralism, equity and equality, tolerate and appreciate are two very critical behaviors that we need to understand. I already took you to that path of equality and equity. Assimilation and pluralism is exactly what happened to this country. The fact that we assimilated anybody meant that you gave up your heritage to become American and speak English. That was real. That was assimilation. Pluralism says the opposite. It's okay for people to hang on to what they believe as far as their cultural heritage, as long as it doesn't harm society, and as also as long as they can meet that expectation society has. So yeah, everybody in America probably should speak some version of English, right? But can't they be bilingual? Go to Germany, go to Europe. Those folks speak English just as good as you do, including to their native language. You know, we just have this thing in America, like English is the hallowed language. No, it's okay, we need it. But my gosh, I learned a little bit of Spanish when I was in college. I absolutely loved it. And I think there's some beauty in so many different languages. But America seems to be stuck on English and what that has done for us. But the other thing I want to tell you is that in this training, I've heard so many experts talk about teaching people to be tolerant. And I will tell you right now, if I ever hear you use that word from Dr. Sheffield's training, I will whip you with a wet noodle. I don't like that word. Tolerant implies you're putting up with something that you don't like. What I try to teach folks is how to appreciate our differences in a way that leads to acceptance. Remember, cultural competency, interaction with folks that are different should never do harm. And I don't like the word tolerate, because to me, I think it's harmful. We ought to learn to appreciate each other based on our differences. And that's what, to me, is critical. So I want to make sure that folks understand that this is about tolerance. And it's also about valuing our differences. So this word always comes to mind every time I talk about being culturally competent. It's really about practicing honor. It's really about exposing people to the things that allow them to interact with folks in an honorable way, as opposed to a dishonorable way. So if your interaction creates dishonor, it's not cultural competence. Cultural competence is never designed to create dishonor. And so it's designed to help folks understand that it's okay to think about the other person. It's okay. And if you do that well, the other person will think about you. So these 4 A's, I learned from that experience about going to work, doing the best job you can. This is what I've learned. That when people feel accepted, when they feel appreciated, when they feel acknowledged and paid attention to, they will perform better. It connects to that human experience. And so those 4 A's are vital to understanding what the fundamentals of being culturally competent are. When you interact with folks, you want to touch those 4 A's. Because I will tell you this, when folks interact with you and me, and they don't feel accepted, and they don't feel acknowledged, and they don't feel appreciated, and they don't feel paid attention to, imagine what that does to the human experience. That's harmful. And so it's so important that kids learn. If there's anything that bothers me in school, you know, Beaver County has a horrible record with suicides in schools. Horrible. Those here that work with BCBH, know, horrible. That's why we have YAP, that Youth Advisory Corps of Kids that work in schools to try to address issues of suicide with kids, because I'm telling you, it's scary to me. And so much of that suicide has generally, for our teens, has something to do with their relationship with their peers. Because they've either been demeaned or harmed by actions of their peers that leads them into that depressive state that can lead to suicide. I'm telling you, if there's anything that bothers me, it's how insensitive our children can act to other kids. They do harm by their actions, words, or thoughts. And I worry, remember, everybody in school deserves an equal opportunity to excel, to feel welcome, to be treated fairly. That's the job of leadership. I get so upset with some of our leaders who think that this is just a product of our kids being kids. Are you kidding me? This is about leaders not being leaders. Equity is their job. Equity leadership is their job. The kids that come to that school ought to know when they come in here, everyone is taught respect, honor, excellence. Together they can achieve. Just do no harm and strive to show the best of you and me. Every child ought to know that when they walk in that door. That this is a do no harm environment, that we will not tolerate kids who harm other kids by their actions, words, or thoughts. That's the culture of a school. And we've got to get better at that if we want to really address kids being insensitive to other kids. It should not happen. And so I'm on a mission to try to help schools understand how to create this kind of environment in their schools. And hopefully this will impact all kids. All kids. And I'm on a major mission to impact our kids with disabilities. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, because I am very much now involved, thanks to Always You. I did my first presentation for Always You with kids with disabilities. You know, and it was just amazing driving home this message of excellence and do no harm. And anybody, I'm telling you, Shakespeare said, "If music be the food of love, play on, give me excess of it." Quincy Jones would come back later and say, "If a song can't take you higher, it ain't good enough to sing." I have learned that music teaches. Rhythm teaches. If you don't believe me, now I got these grandkids, right? And you know, they have their favorite artists and all that stuff out there. I can't even understand half these words these artists are singing. But these kids put those words to rhythm, they know every word. And I'm telling you, when it comes to sending messages to kids, put some rhythm to it. Whether they're disabled, whether they are dyslexic, whether they are linear, doesn't matter what their learning style is. Shakespeare was right. There's something about that teaches. So yes, I'm on a mission to make sure every educational agency, regardless of who it is, every workplace, regardless of who it is, understands this messaging, that our interaction with folks that are different should never do harm. So to reinforce the message that this country sent to its immigrants about assimilation and about the melting pot, this is from a play by Israel Zangwill, and I pulled out this saying that was used in the play about America. Now this is in 1909, I think it is. Yes, 1909. He has this play, and the middle paragraph is from the play. "America is God's crucible, the great melting pot, where all the races of Europe are melting and reforming. Here you stand, think I, when I see them at Ellis Island. Here you stand in your 50 groups, your 50 languages, your 50 histories, but you won't be that way for long. A fig for your feud and vendettas, Germans, Frenchmen, Irishmen, Englishmen, Jews, Russians, into the crucible with you all. Because America was going to melt you into one person, into one being that erases all of what you're bringing, turns you into this American that speaks English." That was what America was all about. And so this notion of melting pot, many of you heard this term, this notion of melting pot describes what America was doing with its immigrants that were coming into this country. And remember, Dr. King would come back later and say, we all came aboard these different ships, but we're in the same boat now, and nobody's really taught us how to do that. What I truly like to believe is we aren't a melting pot, we are a salad bowl. And we are carrots and olives and radishes and cucumbers and tomatoes and peppers. And what cultural competency tried to do is help you understand salad bowl skills. That we need salad bowl skills if we're going to know how to live, work, play, and learn together. And these are so important skills. And the one thing that I've learned about this salad, and this is often the challenge for the salad bowl, this is the challenge. The worst thing that's going to happen to you in a salad is that you will be lightly tossed. You will be lightly tossed. You will be lightly tossed. It's the nature of being in a salad. Because I'm a carrot, you're a cucumber, you may be an olive, you may be a pepper, you may be lettuce, you may be a tomato. It doesn't matter. This is what America is. We have differences. But we're all united in this commonness of trying to live, work, play, and learn together. So yes, you will be lightly tossed. But what I love about the salad is that in that dressing are the ingredients that allow us to rub noses with each other and still be who we are. It doesn't change us. It conditions us to rub against each other and be okay. I often like to call those ingredients kindness, compassion, respect, honor, appreciation. Those ingredients are what really allow us to rub against each other and still be who we are. And that's who America is. What we're absent is the skill set that allows us to do that. So yes, we could all take a sprinkling of those salad bowl ingredients that says just because a person has a different sexual orientation, what does that got to do with their heart? I can rub noses next to them. It doesn't change me. As long as we are all people of goodwill, what difference does it make? You know, I may be Muslim. You may be Jewish. So what? We're in this salad together. These ingredients we all get sprinkled with. Let's recognize we're going to be lightly tossed, but we're not going to be harmed. That's the basis for developing this cultural competency, salad bowl, if you will, skill set. So yes, we all need to understand that this salad bowl is who we are. And if we're going to live, work, play, and learn together, we've got to learn to do this in a way that allows us to experience the positivity of being culturally competent. We've got to get here if America is going to be great. I would love to say we've got to get here if the world is going to be great. Yeah, so hopefully, we'll get to the point where we realize that in this salad bowl, we all have to recognize we will be lightly tossed. Just be comfortable that you'll be the same when it's done. This was an interesting analogy of what America has missed in us all coming here aboard different ships. So my first response is to ask you this question. James Banks, one of the people I used to read when I was in college working on my PhD, was James Banks, and he was an expert in multicultural education. And he had this theory that what makes people know how to interact with people that are different is embedded in their own cultural feelings. In other words, if people know something about their heritage and they have a sense of identity with it, that feeling allows them also to see how that would be important in others. And so he believed that the erasing, the assimilating in America, the erasing of the culture was harmful to kids ultimately becoming culturally competent. So I'm going to ask this question. And let me first tell you that I'm asking it, first of all, because I have an Italian stomach. I do. Oh my gosh, do I ever. I love Italian food. It's been part of my embracing of our cultural difference. I do. So what I'm going to ask you is this. Who in here knows something about their cultural heritage, even to this day, because they've kept connected to it through their family? Who in here knows something about their cultural identity? Either, both of you.
Just a Czechoslovakian history, but my grandmother spoke Czechoslovakian, but
Okay.
nobody does now.
Okay.
That did not get passed on, but food certainly has certain traditions, things of that nature.
So, but you learned that from your family?
I did.
You did. But nobody in your family speaks
No.
that language? Do you?
No. No.
I'm going to share my neighbor's story with you guys as well. It's a fascinating story about my Polish neighbors.
My uncle has our entire family tree, and it's all branched out in many directions, of course. And so I've learned over the last 10 plus years some things where we're connected all the way back to the Revolutionary War that I never knew.
Wow.
Nobody in the family ever talked about it
Right.
except for him keeping track of all this stuff. And so now it's kind of getting passed on to me, and then I'm going to pass it on to my sons.
Great. Isn't it, to me, it's such an important connection that for all of us. Anybody else that has a connected story? Believe me, I know why. I understand. Growing up in New Brighton, my neighbors, Jeffrey and Teddy, were Polish. Now this is back in the 1960, somewhere in there. Yeah, I'm 77, by the way, you all. Trying to retire, but I'm 77. So anyway, back in 1960, I'm going down to get Jeffrey and Teddy to come out and play wiffle ball with me. And their parents are speaking to them in Polish. This is 1960. And so after a while, I wouldn't go down and knock on the door right away. They had a little stoop. You know, back in those days, we had these water pumps in people's yards where they would crank water up from wells. So I would sit there and watch, listen to this language coming out. And after a while, I could tell they were saying similar things, you know, that my parents were saying to me. Before I went outside and played, my bed had to be made. Before I went outside and played, my chores had to be done. You know, you earn the right to chill. And so they were saying these similar things to them in Polish. Okay? Fast forward. It's 1995. I'm teaching a class at Penn State Beaver to education majors. And on my roster is a name, Theodore Jr. And I'm thinking, whoa, same last name as the kid that I played wiffle ball with. On one of this, that was his dad. So after class, I pulled him aside. I said, hey, was that your dad? And is Jeff your uncle? He goes, oh yeah. That is, I get really excited. Do you speak Polish? Not a word. Last year in the summer, I'm at New Brighton. I'm at a sporting event, and in comes Jeff, Ted's brother. He says, Doc, I heard you've been talking about me. I said, yeah, I have. He said, well, I got to tell you something. My parents made it clear to us that they were not to carry their Polishness to school, that they were going to speak English, and that basically this was the end of their Polishness. And so his son grew up not having any understanding of the Polish language. And I thought, my gosh, my kids missed out on the experience I had because of assimilation, and generations, you hear me, have practiced not holding on to their ethnic identity, not passing on their heritage, and because they don't know the positiveness that comes from that, they have nothing to share to others. And that's why James Banks said what he said, that people who don't know their ethnic heritage are at risk for not embracing cultural differences simply because it's not been in their practice. And it is so true. And that's why 23andMe, I think it's kind of going extinct, but Ancestry.com, a lot of the groups out there that are doing things to connect people to their history have really had an impact because people are kind of hungry to know more about their own heritage. But believe me, it was intentional, but not designed to be harmful when it was done. But at the same time, that practice has led us to where we are. So yes, we need to get back to being connected to some of the things that have brought us to this country and share that with others because that speaks volumes about our cultural competency skill set. So, cultural competency properly acted on is a passport for equity for everyone. That we can differentiate honorably in fairness to one another. We can allow somebody else to control the pencil in fairness and feel comfortable about that. We all need to carry pieces of this passport every day that we understand the importance of living, working, playing, learning together, and that we understand that our interaction is based on our competency, and that competence should lead us to do no harm. And so my hope is that this is where we will get, ultimately. The last metaphor I want to talk to you about is this iceberg. And this iceberg really rings true to what we need to be if we're going to assess that very important element of character, of goodwill. Martin Luther King said back in 1963, in his I Have a Dream speech, when I was in Brighton Township painting a one-story brick house with my brothers at the time Martin Luther King was delivering this speech in Washington, D.C. That's how much I remember where I was when I heard this speech, I Have a Dream. And part of that dream was his 4 little children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by,
The content of their character.
amen, the content of their character. He didn't say that it was wrong to judge them. He said it was wrong to judge them for the color of their skin, because character is more important. Goodwill. When you think of an iceberg, we all know that the most dangerous part of the iceberg isn't the part that's above the water. It's the part that's below the water. So what we have to be able to do, is focus on what's below the surface. In order to do that, in order to see character, seeing character sometimes is very hard to see from a distance. You've got to get closer. Cultural competency says, if you possess the ability to make people feel accepted, acknowledged, appreciated, and paid attention to, you will get close enough to see their character. Making a judgment about what's in here, inside, is not a bad thing. You know, it's something you have to do very carefully, but it's not a bad thing. I mean, anybody's a parent in here, I told my kids growing up, they will tell you, you better be careful who you hang with. Do you hear me? You better make good decisions about who you decide to hang with. You know, because they can sink your ship if you get involved in something you know you ain't had no business doing. Tell them that all the time. You want kids to be good judges of character. Most importantly, you want them to judge others for the right reason. And so cultural competency is that piece of us that allows us to feel comfortable getting close enough to see character. And if we're able to do that, there's a good chance that we'll become more accepting of people because we'll see them for the right reasons. And that's all that cultural competency is all about. Get close enough not to make a judgment call on the things that are above the surface. And believe me, sometimes we get confused about the difference between what's above the surface and what's truly below. And I try to help people understand that there's things that are often above the water don't always have something to do with what someone's character is. And so, and I worry sometimes that we harm people on the basis of what's above the water and not below. Scary, but we do. And in America, sometimes we do that in the name of our faith. That really scares me. Faith should never do harm. The exercise of our faith should not do harm. And I worry in America that we have compartmentalized and politicized things in a way that makes people think that it's okay to do harm based upon what's above the water. It's never okay. You know, so it's important for us, if we want to be great. Now, you want to be average, just if we want to be great, we have to focus on the conditions of greatness. And one of them is very clear. Don't judge people for what's above the surface. Get close enough to see their character. And in their interaction with them, don't ever do harm. Cultural competency skills to create a high-performing environment means people should share the same status. Okay, here's another ouch moment. This is an ouch moment. Sometimes in this salad bowl that we live in, we think one ingredient is more valuable than another. that's scary. When people share different status, it oftentimes elevates somebody over another. And this worries me about the interaction we sometimes have. Status should be shared. Nobody should be above the other person. Just because they have more money, just because they have a different religion, just because they have, come from a different family. Status is something we all should share and feel comfortable about. And nobody's status, I'm not talking about position. Yes, we know something about rank. We know what rank is. When you're in the Army, you've got rank. And that rank is important. Not talking about rank. I'm talking about status. Simply people who they are should not have differences. And I worry that sometimes we create that kind of environment, especially when we politicize things. People ought to be able to interact and share the same status. You want to be great? Understand how important sharing status is. So in our schools, I will tell the teacher in a minute, sometimes teachers favor kids who learn quick. Makes their job easy. They learn quick, teachers like that. Puts a smile on their face, they like that. However, if a kid has a different kind of learning style, it takes a little bit more, maybe they're more touchy, maybe they need things explained to them. Sometimes those kids don't get favored. And it's important that those kids in the same classroom share the same status, regardless of how they learn. Really, really important. That messaging that kids don't share the same status is harmful. And so it's really, really important for us to get that as we especially teach our children and teach our educators and teach those that are responsible for people that status should be shared in the workplace so that nobody's favored over somebody else. It's such an important notion. So this notion of status, valuable and critical to learning, to working, to living together. Organizational culture relates directly to where you work. There is something about where you work that makes you act a certain way. Every organization has a culture, something they disseminate to you that tells you this is how you act here. Nowhere do you see that more in place than in our armed forces. Ask me, I will tell you about my oldest son. I remember, I'll never forget, he started his career at Penn. He will tell you this, he started his career at Penn State, didn't work out for him, so I told him, I said, listen, you got two options. Go to work, go to the service. So he decides to go to the Army. He's in the Army for just through basic training, and we're going down to see him graduate, and I will never forget this conversation. He says, Dad, Mom, was I ever a knucklehead? Oh, I said, why you ask? He says, because some of these going on here, they don't know how to act, they don't know how to behave, don't know how to work. I said, what you realize is that, yeah, you might have been a knucklehead, but you learned some very important values that are going to be critical to your life that you're seeing don't happen in everybody. And that may have blessed you in a way that you'll find this career successful. Well, he did. He did. And the best thing that happened to my son is that in addition to being in the Army, they trained him to be a respiratory therapist. So when he got out of the Army, he took the test to be a respiratory therapist. He's been here ever since. It's amazing to me how important it is for us to recognize that every organization has a culture. They teach you certain things the way to act. Everyone does. Your workplace does too. In that organizational culture, it's so important that they understand the conditions of excellence and the conditions of greatness. And it's part of that human experience from their employees. It's so important. And everybody needs to get it, especially when you come from an environment that doesn't have a whole lot of diversity. So yes, every organization has a culture. There's a way you act. So, organizational culture is like a tree. That organization may produce pear trees or apple trees or cherries. And you need to understand, and I tell this to people all the time, when you go to work somewhere, you better understand how to be compatible with that culture. Because it's an apple tree. If you need pears in your life, don't go work there. Because you will be frustrated, because they produce apples. It's just the way it is. And you need to be educated and sensitive to the culture of organizations, even when you go to apply for a job. It's that important. And even the driving engine of those people in charge are related directly to that culture. So one of the things I try to get people to understand about cultural competency is that I'm not trying to produce cherries from an apple organization. What I'm trying to do with this message of greatness is produce better apples at your organization and help you understand what you can, I call it pruning. I'm the prune guy. I am not going to change what grows in your organization. What I hope to do is change the way you think about what will produce the best apples. So, oftentimes cultures clash. I will close with this story about my brother Larry. Larry is, well, I'm going to tell you two stories. Larry was a graduate of Waynesburg. He was a math graduate. My brother Archie was a graduate of Geneva. Archie graduated in '64 from Geneva. Larry graduated, I believe, in 70 or 71 from Waynesburg. So when Larry graduates from Waynesburg, Archie has been already working at IBM. And so Archie says to his brother, hey, how would you like to come to work for IBM? Larry said, oh man, yeah, I wouldn't mind. So Archie says to Larry, guess what? If you come to work for IBM, you got to remember, this is 1971. So this is the Black Power, dashiki, Big Afro organization, or time for black kids, right? So Archie says to Larry, if you're going to come to work for IBM, you got to cut your hair, get rid of that dashiki, and put on a blue suit. Whew. So I'm going to ask you. Now you got to understand, this was a cultural clash. You will probably understand where the cultural clash was going to come from. I'm going to ask you, what do you think my brother Larry did?
Went as he was. Didn't change.
Didn't change? Okay.
Said no thank you.
Say that?
Said no thank you.
He said no thank you to IBM.
Yeah.
Okay.
Based on your explanation of your upbringing, I'm going to say he did put on that blue suit.
So you are directly speaking to the cultural clash. Family and personality. Archie, my older brother, spent 40 years at IBM. Larry, my younger brother, spent 42 years at IBM. Larry grew up Sheffield. In the Sheffield house, remember, lots of kids. One of the messages we got very clear was that it was our job to make sure that everybody had a chance to go to college. So your job was get your degree, get a job, make money, and help your siblings. And at the end of the day, Larry saw this as an amazing opportunity, but the story goes further than that. My brother Larry is now retired and lives in Las Vegas. He is an avid golfer just like me. But if you were to watch Larry operate in this world, he is the most culturally competent person you will ever meet. His ability to interact with folks and come away from that with a positive experience is unbelievable. Now, I will tell you something. Don't you say this to anybody. But at this club, Larry belongs to Paiute Golf Resort. It's a major golf resort, 3 18-hole golf courses. It's one of the most beautiful places to play. Pros love playing there. He belongs to it. When I go there to golf, so, you know, around the golf there is like $200 around. That's expensive. When I go there, these pros in the shop love on my brother so much that they will not charge his brother, me, to come there and golf. They love Larry. And that's because of how he treats them. He's the first one to gather them and take them to dinner just because he likes the way they treat them in this pro shop. And they're the first ones to reciprocate because they love the way he treats them at the pro shop and they want to treat them the same way. It's amazing. But the power of cultural competency, I'm telling you, transcends what's above the water and reaches below the surface to the hearts of people. Believe me, it does. And I have learned this. And when you learn to think about the other person, it plays huge in this notion of greatness. So needless to say, I love going to Vegas to golf. I've already been there twice. I will be there 2 more times before the snow flies. I absolutely love it. And I love being around these folks that love on my brother like they do. It's amazing. And I don't know if he would have had that kind of experience if he hadn't gone to work for IBM. And that's why I say to folks all the time, it's so important to understand that cultural competency is a lifelong skill set. And if we had it more in our homes, if we had it more in our workplace, if we had it more in our schools, if we had it more in our faith-based communities, people would understand how powerful it could be and how it lends itself to greatness. That said, I have my most passionate story is a story of my middle son, Jeremy, and his wife. That was my lesson in the Iceberg. And this lesson in the Iceberg from them has brought me such a blessing. It's 2002. My middle son, Jeremy, he graduated from Geneva, met a girl at Slippery Rock, where his cousin was. He was there visiting his cousin. He meets this girl. So he comes back to his mother and I and says, hey, I met this girl. I think she's going to be the one. I said, okay. He says, well, I got to tell you something first. She's Muslim. Ouch. Ouch. My kids, of course, have grown up Christian. Dad was a African Methodist pastor. Our whole family has been a part of the Methodist hymnody, you know, and so we were in the Methodist church, and he's very much infatuated by this girl. And I said, so his mother and I never forget this comment. Mom, I'm saying to his mother, what are we going to tell him? How's this going to work? How are you going to navigate through the differences in religion, blah, 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 you know, and we were at that time, we were connected to that message, be not unequally yoked, you know, we're trying to navigate through all that, right? Bah. So he said, Dad, I'm just practicing what you guys taught me. Now keep it in mind, my kids are biracial, so I'm married to a German woman. And so that alone had its challenges for us. But he said, but Dad, in addition to your relationship with Mom, In church every Sunday, we say these words. We do. In our Methodist hymn, every Sunday, we talk about the Ten Commandments. And in the Ten Commandments, we say the greatest commandments. And the two greatest commandments are love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, and love your neighbor. And that all the law in the Christian faith is based on those two things. He said, Dad, you say that every Sunday. So, plus, Dad, I saw your iceberg paper that you've been training on. And you said, look below the surface and see what the person's all about, not to judge them by what's above. Ouch! So we decide to meet Karishma, that's her name. Karishma Khan. We say, okay, let's meet her. Let's see what's above the surface. Let me tell you something. I'm going to try and keep from crying. She has been the daughter I never had. She's amazing. I'm telling you, I would have missed out on so many blessings if I hadn't opened my eyes to see how wonderful this gal is. And she is. And what she's brought to our family has enriched us so much. You know, and if I had not allowed myself to really focus on what's below the surface and see the person's heart, that's all that matters. The rest, oh my gosh. And she has just been an amazing addition to my life. So she doesn't call me father-in-law, she calls me dad. That's what's even worse. But what an experience it has been, understanding how important it is to look below the surface and see a person for who they really are. And so I honor them, and I honor her by telling that story, because I'm saying to all of you, don't ever get hung up on some of the things that are above the surface. It's not worth it. And there's nothing about my religion that says, you know, I should be trying. I try to stay in my lane. I try to stay in my lane. Deciding who gets into heaven ain't my job. You know what I mean? Ain't my job. That's not my lane. That's somebody else's. My lane, love and love. Love and love. That's my lane. That's what I'm supposed to do. The rest, you know, I'll leave that to somebody who has the greatest power in doing it anyway. So yes, this has been an amazing journey for me as I've navigated through my trip to Texas and recognized my own cultural incompetence, a daughter who has just been amazing to me, and as well as growing up in a family in which my own siblings has experienced the power of cultural competency. Has just been an amazing journey. And by the way, one of the major notions of America, one of the cultural controls in America, is this notion of majority rules. In America, that's who we are. Majority rules. That's part of our culture, and it drives this engine. Everything that happens in America that's related to organizational stuff, even in the workplace, you know, even at our schools. I tell superintendents all the time, you know, in a school district, if you can't count to 5, your job won't last very long. Because that's all it takes on a school board to fire a superintendent, is counting to 5. Majority rules. It drives this engine. And so I always say to folks, understand that this notion of being in the majority plays a huge role in how we think, in how we act, in how we make decisions. Okay? I say that because that's going to take us into this.